Gravel crunched under heavy steel-toe boots as the desert sun baked the asphalt into a shimmering mirage. Sweat pooled beneath a worn leather cut, stinging old tattoos and deeper scars. He was tired of the road, tired of the noise. His hand hovered over the ignition, ready to tear out of this god-forsaken truck stop, when a dirty, trembling hand slammed onto the chrome handlebars. A kid, no older than 7, ribs showing through a torn shirt, looked up with wide, terrified eyes. "Don't," the boy whispered, his voice cracking. "Don't start your engine." Cole hawked a mouthful of cheap diner coffee back into his mug, the acidic taste lingering at the back of his throat like battery acid. The diner, a dilapidated aluminum tube, squatting on the edge of Route 93, smelled of burnt grease, pine sol, and the stale sweat of truckers who hadn't seen a shower in 3 states. He dug a thumb into the corner of his eye, pressing until he saw stars. At 54, the outlaw life wasn't a thrill anymore, it was a physical weight. His knees clicked when he walked. His lower back felt like a rusted hinge every morning. Across the Formica table, Wyatt was tearing into a plate of eggs that looked like yellow rubber, his thick beard catching crumbs of burnt toast. O'Neill, the youngest of their crew, was busy tapping his combat boot against the table leg, a nervous, meth-adjacent energy that Cole found deeply irritating. They were Hell's Angels. The patches on their backs dictated the way the world reacted to them. Waitresses kept their eyes down. Cops in these small desert towns sat in their cruisers and watched them with a mix of hostility and profound relief when they finally paid their bills and left. Cole didn't feel like a menace today. He just felt old. "You gonna eat that?" O'Neill pointed a grease-stained finger at Cole's untouched bacon. "Take it," Cole grunted, sliding the plate across the table. Wyatt wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, leaving a smear of grease on his knuckles. "We got 200 miles before sundown. Let's gear up. This heat is only gonna get worse." Cole nodded, tossing a crumpled 20 onto the table. It was more than the meal cost, but he didn't care to wait for the terrified teenager behind the register to count out change. He pushed himself out of the booth, his leather jacket groaning with the movement. The heavy chain attached to his wallet clinked against the vinyl seat. Walking out the glass double doors was like stepping into an open oven. The Arizona heat hit them with physical force, stealing the moisture from Cole's lungs in a single breath. The sky was a pale, bleached blue, entirely devoid of clouds. Out in the dirt parking lot, their bikes sat in a row like resting beasts, chrome catching the harsh sunlight and throwing it back in blinding flashes. Cole's bike was a customized Harley Bagger. It was a heavy, mean-looking machine, painted matte black with extended, hard-shell fiberglass saddlebags, meant for long hauls. He loved the bike, but right now, looking at the black leather seat baking in the 110-degree sun, he dreaded throwing his leg over it. He pulled a crushed pack of Marlboros from his chest pocket, clamped one between his teeth, and struck his Zippo. The familiar scent of sulfur and toasted tobacco grounded him. O'Neill was already revving his engine, the straight pipes shattering the quiet of the desert afternoon, rattling the diner's single-pane windows. Wyatt was strapping a canvas duffel to his sissy bar, moving with the slow, deliberate economy of a man who had done this 10,000 times. Cole took a long drag, letting the smoke fill his lungs before exhaling it through his nose. He flicked the cigarette butt into the dirt, crushed it beneath his boot, and walked toward his bagger. He didn't see the kid at first. The boy was small, practically camouflaged against the dusty side of the ice machine, humming loudly against the diner's exterior wall. He was just a shadow, a smudge of dirt and faded fabric in the corner of Cole's peripheral vision. Cole wouldn't have noticed him at all if the kid hadn't moved. A sharp scrape of a sneaker against gravel. Cole paused, his hand inches from the left handlebar. He turned his head slowly. He hated kids. They were loud, sticky, and possessed a chaotic lack of logic that made his teeth grind. The boy stepped out from the side of the ice machine. He was maybe 7 or 8, though it was hard to tell. He was severely underweight. His knees were knobby and covered in fading purple bruises, and his oversized, faded blue t-shirt hung off his frame like a rag on a scarecrow. His face was streaked with dirt and dried sweat, but his eyes were what caught Cole off guard. They weren't the curious, wide-eyed look kids usually gave bikers. They were hyper-alert. Frantic. Cole stared at him for a second, then turned back to his bike. Not his problem. The world was full of neglected desert rats living in trailers with meth-head parents. He didn't have the time or the capacity to care. He swung his stiff right leg over the saddle, wincing slightly as his hip popped. He settled his weight onto the scorching leather, reached into his pocket, and pulled out his keys. "Hey!" a small voice croaked. Cole ignored it. He shoved the key into the ignition. Suddenly, a small body launched across the gravel. Dirt flew as the kid scrambled forward, his tiny, filthy hands slamming onto the chrome of Cole's handlebars, right over the ignition switch. The boy's chest heaved, his breath hitching in his throat. "Don't," the boy whispered, his voice cracking like dry twigs. "Don't start your engine." Cole froze. His immediate instinct was violence, a deeply ingrained muscle memory reaction to anyone touching his machine. His right hand snapped up, grabbing the kid by the collar of his ragged shirt. The fabric was thin and smelled sour, like old milk and unwashed hair. "Get your hands off the paint, kid," Cole growled, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He went to shove the boy backward into the dirt. But the kid didn't let go. Instead of pulling away, the boy dug his dirty fingernails into the leather wrapping of the grips. He squeezed his eyes shut, his entire small body trembling violently, bracing for a hit. He expected to be struck. That much was obvious in the rigid set of his shoulders and the way he tucked his chin to his chest. But he didn't release the bike. "I said, let go," Cole snapped, louder this time, yanking the kid's collar. The fabric tore slightly, but the boy's grip on the handlebars held. The commotion caught the attention of the others. The deafening roar of O'Neill's bike abruptly died as he cut his engine. Wyatt dropped his duffel bag and took a slow step toward them, his heavy boots crunching loudly in the quiet that followed. "We got a problem, Iron?" Wyatt asked, using Cole's road name. His voice was calm, but his hand rested casually near the heavy fixed blade strapped to his belt. "Just a stray," Cole muttered, feeling a sudden, irritating flush of embarrassment. He was a grown man, a heavy enforcer for one of the most notorious motorcycle clubs in the world, and he was currently locked in a wrestling match with a 90-pound third grader over his own ignition switch. "Kick him to the curb and let's ride," O'Neill yelled, wiping a line of sweat from his forehead. "I'm baking out here." Cole looked back down at the boy. "You hear him, kid. Beat it, before I lose my temper." The boy finally opened his eyes. They were a pale, watery brown, bloodshot and completely devoid of childish innocence. "Please," the boy choked out. A single tear cut a clean line through the dirt on his cheek. "If you start it, it'll get too hot. You can't start it." Cole paused, his brow furrowed. "If you start it, it'll get too hot." Paranoia, honed by 3 decades of rivalries, police sting operations, and betrayals, flared instantly in Cole's chest. He let go of the boy's collar. Did someone rig the bike? A pipe bomb wired to the ignition? A thermal trigger under the gas tank? The outlaws had been moving into their territory lately. It wasn't entirely out of the realm of possibility that some prospect had been ordered to wire a bagger while they were eating eggs inside. "What did you see?" Cole demanded, his tone shifting from annoyed to deadly serious. He leaned down, getting in the kid's face. "Did someone touch my bike? A guy in a truck? Someone wearing a patch?" The boy shook his head frantically, his messy blonde hair falling into his eyes. "No, no one touched it." "Then why the hell are you telling me not to start it?" "Because of the pipe," the boy whimpered, pointing a shaky finger. Cole followed the kid's finger. He was pointing toward the rear of the bike, specifically at the heavy, customized exhaust pipes that ran directly beneath the left side hard saddlebag. The pipes got incredibly hot during a ride, hot enough to melt a boot heel if you weren't careful. Wyatt walked up, his eyes scanning the parking lot, checking the perimeter for threats, before looking down at the kid. "What's he babbling about?" "Says something's wrong with the exhaust," Cole said, stepping off the bike. The kickstand scraped against the asphalt. Cole knelt in the dirt, ignoring the shooting pain in his bad knee. He peered under the chassis, looking for wires, C4, a block of clay, anything out of the ordinary. Nothing, just road grime, oil, and hot metal. He stood back up, towering over the boy. The irritation returned, redoubled by the adrenaline spike. "There's nothing there. You playing games, kid? Because I don't play games." "Not under it," the boy sobbed, his composure finally breaking. He wiped his nose with the back of his arm, leaving a smear of snot and dirt. He took a tiny step forward and placed his hand flat against the hard fiberglass shell of the left saddlebag. Inside, O'Neill barked a harsh laugh. "What? Did he stash his stolen candy in your bag, Iron? Just pop the lid and throw it at him." Cole stared at the saddlebag. It was locked. He distinctly remembered locking it when they pulled in an hour ago. He carried a lot of things in those bags that he didn't want the highway patrol finding during a routine traffic stop. Unregistered iron, bundles of cash, sometimes worse. "My bag is locked," Cole said slowly, staring at the boy. "I picked it," the boy said, his voice barely a whisper. "With a safety pin. My dad taught me how to do the trailer door." Yours was easier. Cole felt a cold prickle at the base of his neck. This kid, this starving, bruised stray, had picked the lock on his saddlebag in broad daylight. The sheer audacity of it warred with a sudden, sinking feeling in his gut. Wyatt stepped closer, his demeanor changing. The casual stance was gone. He looked at the saddlebag, then at the boy. "Open it, Cole." Cole pulled the keys from the ignition. His hands, which hadn't shaken during a gunfight outside a bar in Reno 2 years ago, felt strangely clumsy. He walked to the rear of the bike. The boy took 3 rapid steps back, as if afraid of what was about to happen, his hands covering his mouth. Cole slid the small key into the chrome lock of the fiberglass saddlebag. It turned with a crisp click. He hesitated. The smell of the hot asphalt, the gasoline, the distant scent of sagebrush, everything seemed to hyper-focus. What the hell was in the bag? A dead animal? Drugs he was trying to hide from a dealer parent? He unlatched the heavy lid and flipped it open. The heat inside the black fiberglass box hit him first, carrying with it a smell that was entirely out of place in this world of exhaust and old leather. It smelled like baby powder and sour milk. Cole stared. For 5 full seconds, his brain completely failed to process what his eyes were seeing. Nested in the bottom of the saddlebag, wedged between a grease-stained tool roll and a heavy leather jacket Cole kept for cold nights, was a bundle of faded yellow towels. The towels were moving. Very slightly. Cole reached out, his thick, scarred fingers gently pulling back the top layer of the rough terry cloth. A face the size of an apple stared blindly back up at him. It was an infant. Skinny, its skin mottled red from the suffocating heat of the closed black box, its chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid pants. The baby's eyes were closed, its tiny fists balled up tight against its cheeks. It wasn't crying. It looked too exhausted, too dehydrated to cry. If Cole had started the engine, the massive exhaust pipe ran merely an inch below the fiberglass floor of this bag. Within 20 miles, the heat radiating upward would have turned the saddlebag into an oven. The vibration alone would have battered the fragile creature. Cole felt the blood drain from his face. A sudden, violent wave of nausea washed over him. "Jesus Christ," Wyatt breathed, looking over Cole's shoulder. The club president stepped back, pulling his sunglasses off, his eyes wide with shock. O'Neill, who had walked over to see what the holdup was, stopped dead in his tracks. What the fuck is that?" "It's a baby," Cole said. His voice sounded detached, like it was coming from someone else. He looked back at the boy. The The 7-year-old was shaking violently now, tears carving clean tracks down his filthy face. He wasn't looking at the bikers, he was looking at the bundle in the saddlebag. "I'm sorry," the boy sobbed, his words spilling out in a panicked rush. "I didn't know where else to put her. He was gonna hurt her. He was tearing up the whole trailer looking for money, and he hit me with the wrench and she wouldn't stop crying. He hates it when she cries. He said he was gonna put her in the cooler." Cole looked at the kid's knobby knees. The bruises. He looked at the side of the kid's head, where matted hair covered an angry, swollen welt that was slowly seeping dark blood down the boy's neck. "You put her in my bag," Cole said, trying to keep his voice steady. The cynicism that had armored him for decades felt utterly useless right now. "Why my bag? You guys are monsters," the boy sniffled, wiping his nose. He didn't say it as an insult. He said it as a matter of cold, pragmatic fact. "My dad said so. He saw you pull up and he locked the door and told me not to look out the window because you're monsters. And you kill people, I figured. I figured if I hit her with the monsters, my dad would be too scared to ever try and get her back. I thought you'd just drive away and take her somewhere far. But then I remembered the metal pipe. I burnt my leg in a pipe like that once. I couldn't let her burn." Cole stared at the boy. The logic was devastatingly pure. The kid had evaluated his options, realized his meth-head father was a fatal threat to the infant, and decided that giving his baby sister to a heavily armed motorcycle gang was the safer bet, and he would have let them ride away with her if he hadn't realized the mechanical reality of the bike would kill her anyway. The kid had risked his own life, stepping in front of angry bikers just to stop the engine. Cole looked down at his hands. They were stained with grease and engine oil. The knuckles were heavily scarred. The silver skull rings he wore dug into his skin. The boy was right. They were monsters, in the eyes of the world. He reached into the saddlebag. His massive hands, which had broken jaws and held weapons, moved with agonizing slowness. He slid his hands under the yellow towels and lifted the infant out of the fiberglass box. The baby was startlingly light. It weighed almost nothing. As the cooler air of the parking lot hit her, she let out a weak, raspy whimper. Cole held the bundle awkwardly against his heavy leather cut. The smell of stale smoke and leather mixed with the baby powder. He didn't know how to hold a baby. He didn't have kids. He had made sure of that. But he held her tight enough to secure her, pressing the tiny bundle against his chest. "O'Neill," Wyatt said. The president's voice was no longer calm. It was a low, terrifying growl. "Get the water bottle from my bag. Not the cold one. The room temperature one." O'Neill didn't mouth off. He didn't hesitate. He practically sprinted to Wyatt's bike, digging through the canvas duffel. Wyatt stepped up to the boy and crouched down, his bad knees popping just like Cole's. He looked at the bleeding welt on the boy's head. "Where's the trailer, son?" The boy pointed a shaking finger across the highway, toward a cluster of rusted single-wides, partially hidden by dead mesquite bushes. "Number 4, the green one." Wyatt nodded slowly. He stood up and looked at Cole. A silent conversation passed between the two older men. It wasn't about club business. It wasn't about drug routes or turf wars. It was about a line in the sand that even outlaws didn't let people cross. "Take the kid inside," Wyatt told Cole, his eyes fixed on the green trailer across the highway. "Get some water in both of them. Tell the waitress to lock the door." "What about him?" Cole asked, nodding toward the trailer. Wyatt reached behind his back, his hand resting on the heavy steel of his belt. "O'Neill and I are going to go have a little chat with a man about a wrench." The diner door chimed, a cheerful, tinny jingle that felt entirely grotesque against the weight of what Cole carried. The air conditioning hit him instantly, chilling the sweat on his neck and raising goosebumps along his tattooed forearms. He moved awkwardly, his heavy boots scuffing the linoleum. The infant in his arms felt less like a human being and more like a fragile, ticking bomb. He held her away from his leather cut, terrified the heavy silver zippers or the road grime embedded in the hide would somehow poison her. The teenage waitress, a pale girl with a name tag that read Patty pinned to a stained pink apron, froze midway through wiping down the counter. Her eyes darted from Cole's grim, scarred face down to the bundle of yellow towels, then to the filthy, bleeding boy trailing behind him like a stray dog. "Lock the door," Cole said. His voice was a flat, deadened rumble. Patty didn't move. She just stared, her mouth slightly open, the damp rag dripping onto the floor. "Hey!" Cole snapped his fingers, a sharp crack in the quiet diner. "The deadbolt. Throw it. Now." She dropped the rag and scrambled around the counter, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking. She flipped the sign to closed and slammed the heavy brass deadbolt home with a loud metallic thwack. Cole steered the boy toward the farthest booth in the back corner, away from the expansive plate glass windows. He slid into the vinyl seat. It groaned under his weight. He didn't set the baby down. The Formica table was sticky with old syrup and smelled of ammonia. It wasn't a place for something this small. The boy climbed into the booth opposite him, pulling his knees up to his chest, making himself as small as physically possible. He didn't look at the baby. He kept his eyes locked on the table's edge, his breathing shallow and rapid. O'Neill had shoved the water bottle into Cole's hand before leaving. It was cheap plastic, warm from sitting in a canvas bag. Cole twisted the cap off with one hand, and his teeth, spitting the plastic ring onto the floor. "Patty!" Cole barked without looking up. "Bring me a straw. A clean one." The waitress hurried over, her hands shaking so badly she dropped 3 wrapped straws onto the table before managing to push one toward him. She backed away instantly, retreating to the safety of the kitchen's swinging doors. Cole unwrapped the straw. He dipped it into the water bottle, capped the top end with his thick, grease-stained thumb to trap a few drops, and brought it to the infant's face. She was so quiet. Her skin was still angry red, and her lips were cracked. Cole felt a sudden, terrifying spike of adrenaline, not the sharp, focused kind he felt before a brawl, but a cold, sickening panic. He didn't know how to do this. He was an enforcer. He broke things. He collected debts. He rode 1,000 miles of highway a week. Nurturing was entirely foreign to his muscle memory. He gently touched the wet tip of the straw to the baby's parched lips. Nothing. "Come on," Cole muttered, his jaw tight. He rubbed his thumb against her cheek, the skin feeling terrifyingly thin, like wet tissue paper. He tried again, squeezing a single drop of water onto her lower lip. The baby's mouth twitched. A tiny pink tongue, barely thicker than a piece of string, flicked out. She smacked her lips weakly. Cole released his thumb, letting 2 more drops fall into her mouth. She swallowed, her tiny throat working, and then let out a raspy, pathetic sound that vaguely resembled a cough. Across the table, the boy finally moved. He grabbed the water bottle Cole had set down and tipped it back, chugging the lukewarm liquid with desperate, animalistic gulps. Water spilled down his chin, washing away streaks of dirt and mixing with the dried blood on his neck. "Slow down," Cole said, his eyes still fixed on the infant. You'll puke." The boy ignored him, draining half the bottle before slamming it back onto the Formica. He gasped for air, his chest heaving under the oversized, torn shirt. "What's your name, kid?" Cole asked, delivering another 3 drops of water to the baby. "Billy," the boy croaked. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Okay, Billy." Cole shifted his weight. His bad knee was throbbing, a dull ache radiating up his thigh. "Your sister got a name?" Billy shook his head. "Dad just calls her It, or the Noise." Cole's jaw locked. The muscles in his cheeks twitched. The cynical armor he wore, the leather, the patches, the attitude that insulated him from the rot of the world, felt incredibly thin right now. He looked down at the tiny face, currently sucking desperately at the plastic straw for a fraction of a milliliter of water. The Noise. Cole looked up, staring past the boy, out the window, past the glare of the sun on his black bagger, toward the cluster of rusting trailers across the highway. Wyatt and O'Neill had been gone for 4 minutes. It was too quiet. The diner felt like a sensory deprivation tank compared to the brutal heat outside. The only sound was the low, rhythmic hum of the commercial refrigerator in the back and the erratic, wet breathing of the boy sitting across from Cole. Cole watched the trailers through the dusty blinds. Number 4, the green one, it looked like a tomb, half swallowed by dead weeds and piles of rusted auto parts. The aluminum siding was peeling, exposing rotting insulation beneath. He knew exactly what was happening inside that metal box. He had been on both sides of those doors too many times to count. He didn't glorify it. The movies always got it wrong. There was no poetry in a beating. There was no slow-motion choreography or snappy dialogue. It was breathless, ugly, and smelled like copper and panic. It was the sickening thud of a heavy boot against soft tissue. It was the desperate scrambling of a rat backed into a corner. Billy flinched. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, but Cole caught it. The boy's shoulders jerked upward, his eyes squeezing shut. A second later, Cole heard it. A muffled, hollow crash carrying across the baking asphalt. It sounded like a heavy piece of furniture being thrown against an interior wall. "Hey," Cole said sharply. Billy didn't open his eyes. He curled tighter into a ball, his fingers digging into his own knees. "He's gonna kill them," the boy whispered, his voice trembling. "My dad. He's crazy when he's looking for his stuff. He has a gun under the couch." Cole felt a flicker of professional concern, but it was quickly buried by cold reality. Wyatt had been riding with the club for 30 years. He had survived federal indictments, rival gang wars in the 90s, and a prison riot in Chino. O'Neill was a twitchy liability on his best days. But he was fast, and he fought with the unhinged violence of a cornered animal. A meth head in a baking trailer with a hidden pistol wasn't a threat. He was a statistic. "Look at me, Billy," Cole commanded. The boy slowly opened his eyes. They were wide, terrified pools of brown. "Your dad isn't going to kill anyone today," Cole said flatly. He didn't offer a warm smile. He didn't soften his voice. He offered the only thing he knew how to give: absolute, grounded certainty. "The men I ride with, they don't lose, not to guys like your dad." Billy stared at him, taking in the scarred face, the heavy brow, the tattoos creeping up Cole's neck. The boy slowly nodded, accepting the terrifying truth. The monsters had gone to fight the boogeyman. Another sound drifted across the highway, a sharp, high-pitched scream that was abruptly, violently cut short. Then, silence. The silence dragged out. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Cole dripped more water into the baby's mouth. She was starting to wiggle a little, her tiny fists unclenching slightly. The sour milk smell radiating from the towels was getting stronger, a harsh reminder of her neglect. Cole realized with a grim sort of humor that he had no idea what to do if she needed to be changed. He had smuggled kilos of contraband across state lines, but a dirty diaper felt like an insurmountable obstacle. Finally, the diner door handle rattled. "Patty." The waitress let out a small yelp from behind the counter. "Open it," Cole told her. She scurried to the door, fumbling with the deadbolt. As soon as it clicked, the door swung inward, bringing a blast of blast furnace air and the smell of hot dust. Wyatt walked in first. He was moving slower than usual. He took off his mirrored sunglasses, hanging them from the collar of his cut. His knuckles on his right hand were split, dark blood already beginning to congeal against the pale skin. He looked exhausted, his graying beard carrying flecks of drywall dust. O'Neill followed, pushing past the waitress. He was breathing heavily, his eyes dilated, a feral, wired energy buzzing off him. There was a smear of crimson across his cheekbone that didn't look like it belonged to him, and he was wiping the blade of his folding knife methodically against his jeans. Neither man said a word. The silence in the diner shifted from tense to suffocating. Wyatt walked straight past Cole's booth, went behind the counter, ignoring Patty's terrified squeak, and grabbed a roll of industrial paper towels. He walked to the sink, turned on the cold water, and began scrubbing his knuckles. O'Neill slid into the booth next to Billy. The boy instantly pressed himself against the window pane, trying to put as much distance as possible between himself and the younger biker. O'Neill didn't seem to notice. He was staring at the table, his leg bouncing up and down with manic speed. "Done?" Cole asked quietly. Wyatt turned off the tap. He dried his hands, wadded up the paper towel, and threw it into a grease bin. "Done." He walked over and stood by their booth, looking down at Billy. "He won't be looking for you, son. He won't be looking for anyone for a long, long time." Wyatt didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The heavy, metallic smell clinging to his clothes told the entire story. They hadn't killed him. Murder brought the feds, and the feds brought heat that the club didn't need. But they had broken him. Systematically. Physically. "Found a wrench," O'Neill muttered, finally looking up. His eyes locked onto the bloody welt on the side of Billy's head. It was on the kitchen counter. Got blood and blonde hair on it. Cole felt his stomach turn, a cold rage hardening in his chest. He looked down at the baby in his arms. "So what now?" O'Neill asked, leaning back against the vinyl. "We leave him with the waitress and hit the road? We're burning daylight, Prace." Wyatt looked at O'Neill, a long, calculating stare. Then he looked at Cole, and finally at the infant wrapped in the dirty yellow towels. "We can't just leave them," Wyatt said softly. "The hell we can't," O'Neill hissed, keeping his voice low but urgent. "I got 2 unregistered pieces in my saddlebag. You got a warrant pending in Nevada. We got 20 grand in cash in your duffel. We are not calling County Child Services. We leave 'em, we ride." "If we leave them here," Cole said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that cut through O'Neill's panic. "The local cops get called. They trace the kid back to the trailer. They find the dad. The dad tells them 3 guys in Hell's Angels cuts beat him to a pulp. Then every highway patrol between here and Vegas is looking for 3 baggers riding north." O'Neill opened his mouth to argue, then snapped it shut. The logic was airtight. "Besides," Wyatt added, running a hand over his tired face, "he's a kid. And that's a baby. You want to leave them in a diner with a 16-year-old waitress who looks like she's about to pass out." "So what's the play?" O'Neill demanded. Wyatt pulled a thick, black burner phone from his interior jacket pocket. It was a brick, entirely untraceable. "I'm making a call." Calling the police was a cardinal sin. In the world Cole inhabited, handling things in-house was the only law that mattered. You didn't dial 911. You didn't invite the state into your business. But as Wyatt dialed the numbers and walked toward the back of the diner near the restrooms, Cole knew there was no other way. They couldn't take the kids, a motorcycle club hauling a battered 7-year-old and an infant across state lines. Looked like kidnapping, human trafficking, or worse. Cole sat rigid in the booth. The baby had finally fallen asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling against his heavy leather jacket. Her breath was warm against his collarbone. He hated how small she was. He hated how her absolute vulnerability made him feel hollow inside. He had spent 30 years building walls. He had cultivated a reputation for being entirely devoid of empathy. It kept him safe. It kept people away. But sitting here, holding a child that had literally been baked in a fiberglass box minutes prior, those walls felt entirely useless. "You guys really going to jail?" Billy asked quietly. Cole looked at the boy. Billy was watching O'Neill, who was pacing back and forth by the door, muttering to himself and checking his watch every 30 seconds. "No," Cole said. "We aren't going to jail. My dad says cops always arrest bikers." "Your dad says a lot of things," Cole replied, his tone harsher than he intended. He took a breath, letting it out slowly. "Listen to me, Billy. When the cops get here, they're going to ask you a lot of questions. They're going to ask you what happened." Billy swallowed hard. Should I lie? The instinct of a kid raised in a criminal environment. It broke Cole's heart, a small, cynical piece of it snapping clean off. "No," Cole said. "You tell them the truth. You tell them he hit you with the wrench. You tell them he was tearing up the place." "What about you guys?" Billy asked, looking at O'Neill's bloody face. "What do I tell them about you?" Cole leaned forward, ignoring the sleeping infant on his chest for a second. He locked eyes with the boy. "You tell them we bought you a bottle of water. That's it. We pulled over for a coffee. You walked up, and we gave you water. You don't know anything about the trailer. You don't know where we went. Understand?" Billy stared back, processing the information. He was a smart kid. He had to be, to survive this long. He nodded once. "Just water." Wyatt came back from the hallway. He slid the burner phone back into his cut. "Highway patrol is 20 minutes out. We have a narrow window. We sit tight. We hand them over. We get on the bikes, and we do not stop until we hit the Nevada line." The next 20 minutes were agonizing. The sun began its slow dip toward the horizon, casting long, warped shadows across the dirt parking lot. The heat in the diner remained oppressive despite the AC. The smell of burnt coffee and Patty's nervous sweat filled the space. Cole didn't move. He sat like a stone statue, terrified that any sudden shift would wake the baby and trigger a crying fit he couldn't soothe. He stared at the chrome on his motorcycle outside, reflecting on how quickly a day could derail. He had woken up this morning, thinking about miles, gasoline, and cold beer. Now he was calculating the arrival time of law enforcement and harboring an abused infant. "They're here," O'Neill hissed, pressing his face against the glass. Two white Ford Explorers with light bars on the roof tore into the gravel parking lot, a massive plume of dust kicking up behind them. The red and blue lights cut violently through the harsh desert glare, strobing against the aluminum siding of the diner. Cole felt his muscles tense instinctively. The flashing lights were a universal trigger. The doors of the cruisers popped open. 4 Arizona state troopers stepped out. They didn't saunter. They moved with purpose, hands resting instinctively on the heavy black holsters at their hips. They saw the 3 customized baggers. They saw the California plates. They saw the club insignias painted on the gas tanks. The lead trooper, a tall, sunburned man with mirrored aviators, unclipped his radio. He said something into it, his eyes never leaving the diner door. "Here we go," Wyatt muttered. He looked at Cole, then at O'Neill. "Nobody speaks unless spoken to. Keep your hands where they can see them. We are good Samaritans today, gentlemen. Remember that." Wyatt walked to the door and unlocked the deadbolt. He pushed it open, stepping out into the heat, keeping his hands empty and visible at his sides. "Keep your hands away from your pockets," the lead trooper barked immediately, drawing his weapon half an inch from the holster. "Step away from the door." "Take it easy, officer," Wyatt said, his voice smooth, calm, entirely stripped of its usual commanding edge. "We're the ones who called. We got a situation inside." Cole stood up. His knees screamed in protest. He adjusted his grip on the baby, making sure she was entirely visible, a yellow bundle against black leather. "Come on, Billy," Cole said. He walked toward the door, the boy trailing nervously behind him. As Cole stepped out into the blinding sunlight, the troopers immediately tensed. Cole was a massive man, scarred and imposing, wearing the cuts of a notorious organization. But the tension broke, just slightly, when they registered what he was holding. "Jesus," one of the younger troopers breathed, his hand dropping away from his gun. "Found them in the parking lot," Wyatt lied smoothly, pointing a thumb at Billy. "Kid was banged up. Said his old man went crazy in one of those trailers across the way. We brought them inside, gave him some water, and called you folks." The lead trooper looked from Wyatt to Cole. He took off his sunglasses. His eyes were hard, skeptical. He knew who he was dealing with. He knew the Angels didn't do community service. He looked at O'Neill, noting the fading adrenaline and the suspicious red smear on his cheek. Then he looked at the trailers across the highway. "Is that right?" the trooper said slowly. "Yes, sir," Cole rumbled. An ambulance wailed in the distance, growing louder rapidly. The cavalry was arriving. "All right," the lead trooper said, gesturing to one of his deputies. "Get the kid in the back of the cruiser with the AC on. Wait for the EMTs to check the infant." He took a step closer to Cole, lowering his voice so only the bikers could hear. "I'm going to send 2 men over to that trailer to check on this crazy old man. If I find a body in there, all 3 of you are wearing bracelets before the sun goes down." "You won't find a body, officer," Wyatt said calmly. "Just a man who had a bad day." The ambulance pulled in, kicking up more dust. 2 paramedics jumped out, carrying a medical bag. "Here," the trooper said to Cole, gesturing toward the EMTs. "Hand her over." Cole walked toward the female paramedic. She looked at him with a mixture of fear and confusion. He didn't say anything. He just gently extended his arms, offering the bundle of yellow towels. The paramedic took the baby. The moment the weight left his arms, Cole felt a strange, hollow sensation in his chest. The heat from her tiny body lingered on his leather cut, a phantom warmth. He watched as the paramedic rushed the infant to the back of the ambulance, immediately pulling out a stethoscope and calling for fluids. Cole turned around. Billy was standing by the open door of the police cruiser, hesitating before getting in. The boy looked back at Cole. There was no tearful goodbye, no cinematic salute. Cole just gave him a single, curt nod. "Survive," the nod said. "You did good. Now survive the rest." Billy nodded back, a tiny, solemn dip of his bruised head. He climbed into the back of the cruiser, and the trooper shut the heavy door behind him. "All right," the lead trooper said, turning back to Wyatt. "You boys are clear. Get on your bikes and get the hell out of my county. If I see you on this stretch of 93 again, I'll pull you over for breathing too hard." "Appreciate the hospitality, officer," Wyatt said dryly. They walked back to their bikes. The heat was unbearable now, the leather seats scalding hot. Cole swung his leg over his bagger, ignoring the pain in his hip. He pulled the key from his pocket and jammed it into the ignition. He looked at the left saddlebag. The lock was still engaged, completely normal, but he knew he would never look at that fiberglass box the same way again. He hit the starter. The heavy V-twin engine roared to life, a deafening mechanical thunder that vibrated through his boots and up his spine. Wyatt and O'Neill fired theirs up a second later. Cole didn't look back at the ambulance. He didn't look at the police cruisers. He kicked it into first gear, popped the clutch, and tore out of the parking lot, the rear tires spinning briefly in the dirt before catching the asphalt. They rode north, the wind howling past their helmets, putting miles between them and the diner. But as Cole stared down the long, empty ribbon of blacktop, the vibration of the engine beneath him felt different. It wasn't the roar of freedom anymore. It was just noise. And for the first time in his life, he found himself wishing it was quiet. The wind at 80 miles an hour wasn't a breeze. It was a physical assault. It battered Cole's chest, pulling at the heavy leather of his jacket and threatening to tear his grip from the handlebars. The desert slipped by, in a blur of scrub brush and sun-bleached rock, the landscape slowly bleeding from the harsh, pale orange of afternoon into the bruised purple of early twilight. Cole leaned into a sweeping curve, the floorboards of his heavy bagger hovering an inch above the asphalt. His left knee ached with a dull, throbbing rhythm that perfectly matched the massive pistons firing between his legs. He kept his eyes locked on the dotted white line, but his brain was stuck in a skipping loop. He kept feeling the weight. It wasn't a heavy weight. That was the problem. He was used to hefting engine blocks, kicking down solid core doors, carrying duffel bags packed tight with tightly rolled bills. But the ghost weight of the infant against his collarbone was infinitely heavier. It was the weight of sheer, terrifying fragility. Up ahead, Wyatt's taillight flared red as they crested a hill. The Nevada border was close. The temperature was finally dropping, the suffocating heat giving way to the biting chill that always accompanied the desert night. Cole shivered, though he wouldn't admit if it was from the cold or the adrenaline slowly leaching out of his muscles, leaving behind a toxic, metallic exhaustion. They pulled off at a grim little motel squatting off the shoulder of the highway, 30 miles outside of Vegas. The neon sign buzzed like an angry hornet, sputtering in the dark. Vacancy. The sea was burnt out. Gravel crunched as they parked in a line outside to room 12. Wyatt killed his engine first, the sudden silence falling over them like a wet blanket. O'Neill cut his a second later, kicking his stand down with unnecessary force. The kid was still wired. Cole turned the key. The massive V-twin choked out, the hot metal ticking and pinging as it immediately began to cool in the night air. He didn't move to get off right away. He just sat there, staring at the peeling green paint of the motel door. "Get the bags," Wyatt grunted to O'Neill. The president's voice was raw, his throat ruined by the dry wind and the screaming out in the trailer park. O'Neill didn't argue. He unstrapped Wyatt's canvas bag, then moved to his own bike. Cole finally swung his leg over, ignoring the sharp stab in his hip. He walked to the rear of his motorcycle. He needed his gear for the night. A clean shirt, his shaving kit, a spare magazine for the .45 tucked into the small of his back. He stared at the left saddlebag. The black fiberglass shell was covered in a thin layer of highway dust. His hand hovered over the chrome latch. He could smell it. Even over the potent stench of hot oil, gasoline, and ozone, his brain conjured the distinct, powdery scent of the baby. It was lodged in his olfactory memory like a splinter. He pulled his hand back, opting to open the right saddlebag instead. He dragged out a crumpled black t-shirt and his leather dop kit. The left bag stayed locked. Inside the motel room, the air smelled intensely of industrial bleach and stale cigarette smoke. The carpet was a sticky, dark brown, covered in cigarette burns that looked like small black pocks. Wyatt went straight for the bathroom. The plumbing groaned violently as he turned on the tap. O'Neill dropped the bags on the rickety wooden table, immediately unzipping his own and pulling out a bottle of cheap amber whiskey. He cracked the seal with his teeth, spit the plastic wrapper onto the floor, and took a long, desperate pull. "You want some?" O'Neill asked, wiping his mouth, his eyes darting toward Cole. The red smear on his cheek had dried to a rusty brown flake. "No," Cole said. He tossed his stuff onto the sagging mattress of the bed nearest the door. He sat down heavily, the springs shrieking in protest. He unlaced his heavy boots, pulling them off and tossing them against the wall. His feet ached. His spine felt like ground glass. The bathroom door creaked open. Wyatt stood in the frame, drying his hands on a thin, scratchy towel. He looked older than his 58 years tonight. The harsh, fluorescent light from the bathroom carved deep, shadowed canyons into his face. "We drop the cash tomorrow at noon," Wyatt said, his voice flat. He walked over to the table and took the whiskey bottle from O'Neill, taking a calculated, measured swallow. "Then we get the hell back to Oakland. I'm done with this heat." "You think the local cops put it together?" O'Neill asked, his paranoia finally bubbling to the surface. He paced the narrow strip of carpet between the beds. "The dad in the trailer. The blood on my knuckles. The kid. What if that 7-year-old opened his mouth?" Cole looked up from his bare feet. "He won't." "You don't know that, Iron," O'Neill snapped. "He's a kid. Cops put a little pressure on him. Offer him an ice cream cone, he'll sing." "I told him to say we just bought him water," Cole said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a dangerous, vibrating warning. "He's a survivor. He knows the rules." "He's a grade schooler," O'Neill yelled, his voice cracking. "And we left a guy looking like ground meat in a trailer across the highway. If he dies..." Wyatt stepped forward, moving with a sudden, terrifying speed that belied his age. He grabbed O'Neill by the throat, pinning the younger man against the cheap wood paneling of the wall. The whiskey bottle in Wyatt's other hand didn't even slosh. "He's not dead," Wyatt hissed, his face an inch from O'Neill's. "I broke his collarbone, his jaw, and 2 of his ribs. I shattered his right knee so he'll never walk right again, and I took the teeth he had left. But he is breathing. You want to panic, you go outside and walk into the desert. In here, you shut your mouth." O'Neill choked, his hands coming up to pry at Wyatt's thick fingers. He nodded frantically. Wyatt let him go. O'Neill slumped against the wall, coughing, massaging his neck. Cole watched the exchange with dead eyes. He didn't care about O'Neill's panic. He didn't even really care about the legal heat. He had spent his whole life calculating risks, balancing the scales of violence and consequence. That was the life. But as he lay back on the cheap, thin bedspread, staring up at the water stains on the popcorn ceiling, he realized the scales were permanently tipped. "You guys are monsters. My dad said so." The kid hadn't been wrong. Wyatt breaking a man into pieces to protect a child didn't make them heroes. It just made them a more efficient, terrifying brand of monster. They were the apex predators of the asphalt. Cole closed his eyes. The roar of the highway was gone, replaced by the humming neon sign outside the window. But in the silence, all he could hear was the weak, raspy breath of a dying infant and the soft click of a saddlebag locking shut. 2 days later, the stark silence of the desert was entirely swallowed by the aggressive, artificial sensory overload of Las Vegas. They weren't on the Strip. The club didn't do business under the glittering lights of the Bellagio or the Wynn. They were in North Las Vegas, parked behind a cinder block garage that smelled of industrial solvent and cheap marijuana. The heat here was different. It was trapped by concrete, radiating upward through the soles of Cole's boots, like a stovetop. The drop was smooth. It usually was. A man they knew only as T-Bone, a heavily tattooed local who ran stolen parts to Mexico, took the duffel bag of cash from Wyatt. In exchange, he handed over 2 tightly wrapped grease paper bundles. Unregistered hardware, cold, heavy, and entirely untraceable. Cole took one of the bundles. He walked over to his bagger, popped the right saddlebag, and wedged the heavy package between his tool roll and a spare jacket. He locked it. T-Bone was talking to Wyatt, a cigarette dangling from his lower lip. "You boys hear about that mess down near Kingman?" Cole's hands froze on his keys. He didn't turn around. He just listened, the muscles in his neck tightening like steel cables. "What mess?" Wyatt asked. His tone was a masterpiece of casual indifference. "Some tweaker got his clock cleaned in a trailer park." T-Bone laughed, a wet, rattling sound. "Cops found him looking like a dropped pie. Best part? They found a kid in the back of a state trooper's cruiser at a diner across the street. The dad got his face caved in, and the kids got snatched by the state. Local news is having a field day. They think it was a cartel hit gone wrong. Mules settling a score." Cole felt a tight, cold knot in his stomach, loosen just a fraction. Cartel hit. The cops were looking south, not west. "Shame," Wyatt said flatly. "World's full of scumbags." "Ain't that the truth?" T-Bone agreed. "Anyway, pleasure doing business, Wyatt. Ride safe." They hit a local dive bar a few miles from the garage to wait out the worst of the afternoon traffic before making the long burn back to California. The bar was a dark, subterranean cavern, smelling of stale beer, urine, and decades of regret. The floor was sticky. The air conditioning rattled loudly above the pool tables. Cole sat at the corner of the bruised mahogany bar. He had a bottle of Budweiser in his hand. The glass was sweating, pooling water onto a cardboard coaster. He lifted the bottle and took a long drink. It tasted metallic. Everything had tasted metallic for the last 48 hours. The food, the coffee, the beer. Above the bar, a muted television was running the local midday news. A blonde anchor with perfectly sprayed hair was talking over footage of a generic hospital exterior. Cole watched the ticker at the bottom of the screen. Kingman assault suspect in critical condition. Children placed in CPS custody. He stared at the screen. He wanted to feel a sense of justice. He wanted to feel the righteous satisfaction of a protector. He was an enforcer. He punished people for a living. This should have been the one time he felt good about the damage his club caused. But he didn't. He thought about Billy. The kid was smart, tough, but the system was a meat grinder. Cole knew. He had grown up in it. Pity, foster homes, group homes, juvenile halls. Billy survived the trailer, only to be thrown into a different kind of cage. And the baby. she would probably be adopted out. She would grow up never knowing that a terrified 7-year-old had negotiated her survival with a gang of armed felons in a desert parking lot. O'Neill slid onto the stool next to him, slamming a shot glass down on the wood. He was smiling again, the paranoid terror of the motel room erased by the successful drop and a few drinks. "Easy money, Iron," O'Neill grinned, signaling the bartender for another round. "We hit the highway by 4. We'll be back in the bay by tomorrow morning." Cole looked at O'Neill. He looked at the club patches on O'Neill's leather cut. The winged death's head. The 1%er diamond. The symbols that told the world they were apart from society, that they lived by their own brutal, uncompromising laws. "Yeah," Cole rumbled, his voice hollow. "Easy money." He stood up, leaving half his beer on the bar. "Where you going?" O'Neill asked, already reaching for his fresh shot. "To check the tires," Cole lied. He pushed through the heavy wooden door of the bar, stepping back out into the blinding Nevada glare. The heat hit him like a physical blow. He walked over to his bike. It sat in the alley, black paint, gleaming under a layer of grit. It was a beautiful machine. It represented everything he cared about: freedom, power, movement. He walked around to the left side of the bike. He crouched down, his bad knee popping loudly in the quiet alleyway. He looked at the massive chrome exhaust pipe. He placed his hand half an inch above the metal. The engine had been off for an hour, but the pipe was still radiating a fierce, baking heat. Cole reached into his pocket and pulled out his keys. He slid the small key into the lock of the left saddlebag. It turned with a sharp click. He opened the lid. It was entirely empty. The yellow towels were gone, left behind in the ambulance or the dirt. There was nothing inside but the smooth, black fiberglass walls and the lingering phantom scent of sour milk and baby powder. He stared into the empty black box for a long time. He was a monster. He accepted that. He had chosen the patch, the life, the violence. But as he looked into the empty space where a dying child had laid, he realized that even monsters had ghosts. And this one was going to ride with him for the rest of his life. He slammed the lid shut. November, 6 months later. The Northern California rain was relentless. It wasn't a downpour. It was a fine, freezing mist that penetrated layers of heavy denim and leather, settling deep into the marrow of Cole's bones. The sky over Oakland was the color of a bruised steel plate. Cole stood in the open bay of the club's fortified garage, holding a rag stained with black grease. The smell of the desert, the hot asphalt, the sagebrush, the baked dirt was a million miles away, replaced by the damp, heavy scent of wet leaves, exhaust, and the bitter tang of cheap coffee brewing in the corner of the shop. He was 55 now. His knee hurt worse in the cold dampness. His knuckles were permanently swollen. The bagger was up on a hydraulic lift in the center of the bay. Cole was running a rag over the chrome primary cover, wiping away the grimy road spray from a run-up to Eureka the night before. "Hey, Iron," a voice called out. Cole didn't turn his head. He just kept wiping the chrome. It was Rat, a new prospect. The kid was 22, eager, desperate to prove himself to the patched members. He walked over, carrying a heavy canvas tool roll, filled with heavy wrenches and sockets. "Wyatt said you needed these packed for the run to Portland tomorrow," Rat said, holding up the heavy roll. "Yeah," Cole grunted. "Put 'em on the workbench." "I can just stow 'em for you," Rat offered, trying to be helpful. He stepped toward the bike, reaching for the latch on the left saddlebag. "I'll just drop 'em in here." Rat's hand never touched the chrome. Cole dropped the rag. His right hand snapped out with a speed that defied his age and his aching joints. He grabbed Rat by the throat of his heavy sweatshirt, twisting the fabric tight and shoving the kid backward. Rat stumbled, his boots slipping on an oil patch, and slammed hard against the metal edge of the workbench. The heavy tool roll clattered to the concrete floor with a deafening crash. The garage went dead silent. 2 other members working on a chopper in the back stopped what they were doing and turned, hands instinctively dropping to their belts. Rat's eyes were wide, terrified. He held his hands up, palms open. "Hey, man, I'm sorry, I was just—" Cole stood over him, his chest heaving. His jaw clamped so tight his teeth ground together. The rage was immediate, blinding, and completely out of proportion. He stared at the terrified 22-year-old, his fists trembling. "You don't touch that bag," Cole said. His voice wasn't a yell. It was a terrifying, guttural whisper. "Nobody touches that bag." He let go of the kid's sweatshirt and stepped back. Rat scrambled to his feet, rubbing his chest, his face pale. "I'm sorry, Iron. My bad. I didn't know." "Get out," Cole said. The prospect didn't need to be told twice. He practically sprinted out of the open bay doors into the freezing rain. Cole stood alone by the bike. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the damp air burning his lungs. He bent down and picked up the heavy tool roll from the floor. He walked around to the right side of the motorcycle, popped the saddlebag, and shoved the tools inside. He locked it. He walked back around to the left side. He ran his thick, scarred fingers over the smooth, black fiberglass. He hadn't put a single item in the left saddlebag in 6 months. No cash, no guns, no clothes, not even a spare pair of gloves. The club noticed, of course. Bikers notice everything about another man's machine. But after Wyatt quietly pulled a few members aside, after they got back from Vegas, nobody ever asked Cole about it. It was an unspoken rule. The left bag was dead space. Cole stared out into the gray sheet of the California rain. He didn't know what happened to Billy. He didn't know if the baby girl survived the night in that Arizona hospital. In his world, you didn't look back. You didn't track down loose ends unless you were going to burn them. He had made a choice that day in the desert. He had stepped out of his lane for 10 minutes to be something closely resembling a human being. And then, he had stepped right back into the darkness. He couldn't save them. He couldn't adopt them. He was a violent man, leading a violent life. But as he looked at the empty black box, he knew it was a permanent monument to the only clean thing he had touched in 30 years. He grabbed his heavy leather jacket from the workbench and shoved his arms into the sleeves. He threw his leg over the bike, kicked it off the lift, and hit the ignition. The engine fired, a massive mechanical roar that drowned out the sound of the rain. He pulled the clutch, kicked it into gear, and rode out into the cold, gray morning. The left saddlebag remained empty. It always would, because no matter how fast he rode, or how loud the pipes screamed, he was always carrying the ghost of a boy who was brave enough to stand in front of a monster and beg him not to start his engine. If you felt the grit, the heartbreak, and the unexpected humanity of this story, do not leave without hitting that like button. It helps push raw, real stories like this to a wider audience. If this completely changed your perspective on what heroes can look like, share this video with a friend who appreciates a deep, grounded narrative. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our cinematic storytelling. I want to hear from you down in the comments. What did you think of Cole's decision? Did he do the right thing by riding away, or should he have done more? Drop your thoughts below, and I'll see you in the next one.